listeners to the Gaius Libertatis Project. Today I will be talking to Patrick McFarlane from the Liberty Weekly podcast. As I mentioned in my introduction post on Steemit, which you can find at tinyurl.com/intro Gaius, Patrick is the person that inspired me to start this project. This interview is pre-recorded. I have a few questions I wrote down in advance, but those are mostly general questions and we can improvise from those. So, Patrick, would you like to introduce yourself and tell the audience when, how, and why you started the podcast?
Yeah, no problem. My name is Patrick McFarlane. I'm a third-year law student in the United States in Minneapolis, or I guess St. Paul in Minnesota. And I started the Liberty Weekly podcast way back in the summer of 2016. I had started as a blogging site, and I got it through the Tom Woods hosting deal that he has there. So the site, it started as a blogging site and then morphed about a year ago in May, actually, into a podcast that I started with a friend. And the impetus behind the whole thing is just that I learned about libertarianism, about Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism, and I got so excited, like a lot of us did. And yeah, right. And I got evangelical, as I call it, about it. I started preaching about it and just talking about it to everyone. And then I didn't want to talk their ear off anymore. So I had to find a positive outlet. So I started the Liberty Weekly podcast, and it's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of great people, including Dice.
And how and when and why did you decide to go from blogging to podcasting? And do you still blog, or has it gone to the background anymore?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I do write. It's mainly a podcast, and I got into that just because I was inspired by Tom Woods and by James Corbett, I guess primarily. It's like having a conversation continually that you can, and what we're doing now, we're just, I guess, talking with each other. A lot of what it has just been talking with people and also doing projects on presentation about legal theory or trying to share some libertarian theory with the world. But it's been really fun. I think it's easy for a lot of people to do if you have the right equipment. And it's just been an all around positive experience. You can tangibly feel the change that you're making because you connect with people, and people will come up to you and on social media and say, "Hey, I listened to your stuff and it was really cool. I learned a lot," and it feels good, And I hope that with this project you'll be able to feel that same thing. And
I hope so.
I've been encouraging people, or trying to encourage people to have a voice and have their own voice. But essentially, I think what podcasts are and what video blogging is just the future of communication. I think it won't be weird in the future, to have a social media online presence in person where you can have political conversations or just, building community and talking.
The second question is, could you briefly talk about how we first encountered and then about how and why you decided to interview me?
Yeah, as I kind of alluded to, you meet a lot of great people and you meet people from around the world. And I think at the time that you reached out to me, Thijs, on Facebook, so essentially what the show is that I become obsessed with things because I'm an obsessive person, and I get really into stuff. And there was like a 2 or 3 week period where I was really into connecting with other people in the liberty movement who aren't from the United States and looking beyond that scope. And at that time, I think I was speaking with Dallas Faraz from Brazil, and he reached out to me on Facebook, and then we had an episode together because you said that you were a law student in the Netherlands, and I thought that was super cool and interesting. And so we had a little chat about, I think it was the European Commission on Human Rights and how the European Union has affected legislation. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as I can remember, we talked mostly about the EU and how it interacts with the Dutch legal order and something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was at libertyweekly.net/40, the number 40. So that was a great conversation. And what was the other part of your question?
That's basically the questions.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, my next question was, so you're in third year of law school, you said, correct?
Yeah.
Could you tell audience a bit about how your law school experience has been, how you've decided to go to law school, and how it has interacted with your libertarian leanings, basically?
Yeah, well, I wasn't an ANCAP, I wasn't an anarcho-capitalist or a voluntarist, and when I started law school, I wasn't. I was more of like a minarchist, classical liberal, like Ron Paul type. Love the founding fathers, that kind of stuff. But going to law school has been crazy, and it's changed me in a lot of ways that has nothing to do with the podcast. It's very scary, and maybe you can relate to this, Thice, but they scare you a lot, and essentially you don't really know what you're doing, and you just have to have faith in yourself and confidence and try and figure out how the system works, essentially. And I've learned that you don't realize how much the law affects the world around you until you go to law school, and you don't realize you start to realize the human interactions and the way that people decide to organize society and how it tangibly works in the real world, and how all these legal relationships are playing out around you, whether you realize it or not. And that's been an interesting experience. In terms of being a libertarian and a law student, you're the far intellectual minority. And law school, at least in the United States, is a factory for statism. And so you kind of get frustrated and a little isolated, but at the same time, it's liberating to figure these things out about the law and to know how to interact with them. So
it's also been kind of my experience with what you said about the law, how much it interacts with the society. For instance, I have these two giant books. Maybe I have one over here. I have one over here. You can show it on the camera. So this is part one.
Yeah.
And part two, and that's only like 1% of all the laws in the book. So it's an entire giant web of rules and regulations, and you also really understand how fundamental it is with contracts, for instance, that everyone is constantly contracts and all of that stuff. So that's definitely something I experienced as well, and it's also the same in the Netherlands that thank you. Libertarianism is there as also a minority. You get very strong, and like the state is obviously necessary and obviously the unquestioned assumption, if you will.
Yeah.
And but you also understand a bit more about the rule of law and how important it really is, and that's also what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll get that. I was gonna say I have my book too. I brought it. It's not in the room with me, but it's the Uniform Commercial Code, which governs transactions in the United States, and it's like this thick. I was going to show. Yeah. So I'm almost done with law school. It's been a long journey, and it's nice to be done. I'm glad. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. And so when you were asking people around about going to law school, did attorneys over there, did they say, don't do it?
Yeah.
Because that's what they say here. And that's what I heard is, attorneys would be like, don't do it. It sucks.
Yeah, so it's a lot of work. As I understand it, both sides of the continent, it's a lot of reading and a lot of solving cases and so on. It's a lot of work, but
yeah. It's like, I think what they do is because I think a lot of people think that being an attorney that you do learn a lot about how the law is created, or you learn a lot about, how the law works and how statutes work and how to read cases and stuff. But a lot of people think because you're a lawyer, you know everything there is to know about what the law is. And it's a lot of the times the only thing they do in law school is they take your brain apart and then they put it back together like a lawyer. and then you can think like a lawyer. They don't teach you, the substance. Usually they just teach you how to think that way and how to write a brief and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's also my experience. You basically mostly thought, so you know what the sources are, the statutes, where you can find jurisprudence, so where the judges, what judges have ruled. But yeah, there's such enormous mountain of law that even the people making it only know like 1% of all the laws that exist. So,
yeah,
it's definitely
it is crazy,
impossible to know it all.
Yeah, but so you're just in your second year, right?
Yeah, it's kind of. I had some delay with my courses, so I had to redo a couple. But I should be finishing up my bachelor next year, and then pick a master to go to. Yeah. Okay, so my next question was, or do you want to say something?
No, that's all right. Yeah.
Okay. The Libertarian Union Network. So you have on Facebook, in particular, you have network that you're a part of a lot of libertarian podcasters. Could you perhaps tell the audience something about that and how it came to be and where you think it might be going?
Yeah, it's so as I alluded to earlier, when you get online and start having a voice and having these conversations, you start to meet other people and realize that there's you're not alone, and you make a lot of good friends. And that's what I've done with the guys in the Libertarian Union group. It kind of started between me and Daniel Elwood from the Actual Anarchy podcast. We were connecting, and we had this idea because we were just, splintered small fit. We are, we don't have huge, large audiences. I think I get like 200 to 230 or 250 downloads per episode. And I think they get 500 per episode. So we're a small little community and a little group, and we have a lot of friends that have shows too. And so we decided, Roger Paxton has Pax Libertas or Pax Libertas is what he calls it. It's a group with the Lava Flow podcast and the ANCAP Barbershop and stuff. But we have our own, and we called it the Libertarian Union because Daniel just had a URL that he had bought lying around. And so it's at libertarianunion.com. If you go there, you can find all the other shows that are also in the group. And it's been really positive. We have one roundtable show per month that we do called the State of the Libertarian Union talk show. And so we do that. We also promote each other. We have a bumper that we play on everyone's podcast just to try and direct traffic in one area. And I guess the general idea when it comes to that is having a network of content providers that can rely on each other and build each other up, but also to have shows that can generate revenue that we in turn can invest in capital to help spread the message of liberty. So it's a type of counter economic activity, if you will, but trying to, like I said, generate revenue and use that to invest in capital to spread the message with. So it's been a lot of fun so far. And I think it's cool that Dice is you're starting your show, in Europe, and that's pretty cool. Are there other Liberty podcasts in Europe that you know of?
Well, as far as Dutch podcasts are concerned, I really only know one. It's from another member or previous member of the local Libertarian Party, and he broadcasts occasionally, but there's a lot more libertarian podcasts on the other side of the Atlantic, basically. So, I might just with my project have some niche to fill, basically. If there's enough demand, of course. If there's enough listeners,
Yeah, of course you can find that, and just go at it, be a voice, and that's kind of what I felt like with the Libertarian Union. And I think we're kind of going in the direction of content creation, right? Just
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do with, with Liberty Weekly is what I wanted to do, because I realized that I think aside from Stefan Kinsella, there's no one out there really talking about libertarian legal issues and doing that analysis. So I thought of course, I got sidetracked and I started, I want with the podcast, I want to go towards that direction. But in the past, I've always done other shows and had conversations, but primarily Liberty Weekly is supposed to be about legal issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting because how I generally got exposed to libertarianism. It's almost like 90%. It's about economics basically, and then there's some philosophy. And yeah, I'm also familiar with Stefan Kinsella and some other authors on law, and of course Rothbard and Friedman and so on. They have also written about law, but it's kind of an underexposed topic. So yeah, it's definitely. Definitely hope to, in combination with your American perspective, I can deliver an European perspective on legal issues and also a general philosophical take. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be great, because like I don't spend a lot of time focusing on European issues, obviously, but well, it's interesting too, because there's a lot of niches to fill. You could follow the Supreme Court primarily, or from the American perspective, you could you could do what a lot of other people do and report on criminal justice things happening, like police shootings and stuff. You can report on that, or you can report on the Supreme Court, or you can go a philosophical route. So even within the area of law, there's a lot of different things you can do.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd like to zoom in on the law part a bit more if you have time.
Yeah.
So you have a series of legal episodes, and yeah, of course, I'm not going to ask you to summarize it entirely right now. But if you like, could you just talk briefly about, for instance, your recent episode Magna Carta, and on the Magna Carta, and you have an episode on nullification through Lysander Spooner. You've done some work on judicial review, as well as your paper on domestic violence and stateless solutions. Could you perhaps pick a few topics to talk about a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently on spring break, and I had in mind all this stuff I was going to do for the show, but I fell down the rabbit hole of learning about the Magna Carta and learning about Anglo-Saxon common law. And I did a lot of reading, quite a few hours of reading, but I produced an episode called The Real Magna Carta that I've been meaning to come out with for a long time. And, oh, this is great. I actually have the book right next to me. But a lot of my episodes have been focused around this book that I got from my law school library. Let's see, it's not focusing. And this was edited by Murray Rothbard, actually, but it's just a collection of Lysander Spooner's writings. And it's been at the library since 1980, and I'm the third person to check it out. Yeah. The first person since... Oh, no, it's been at the library since 1972, but I'm the first person to check it out since 1980. And there's been 3 people. So, but what I've been doing is Lysander Spooner had the essay Trial by Jury. And so I have a series of episodes just kind of outlining that essay, but also expounding upon it by doing extra research and bringing in other facts and figures. So I have 2 episodes on just the trial by jury. That's episode 56, so libertyweekly.net/56 and /58. The first one is on jury nullification. The second one is about the Magna Carta episode. I've also done a writing on Lysander Spooner's The Constitution of No Authority, which is in this book. And I'm not sure exactly which number that one is. I think it's in the 30s. But yeah, now I have about 60 episodes now. So I can't remember exactly what numbers are just generally.
Yeah.
But
you can find it, listeners, you can find it on libertyweekly.net, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the right-wing individualist tradition in America, right? It's for,
that's
the
the
book. Yeah.
I think it's rare, though. I think it's a little more rare. I've had it checked out all year from the library. But the Lysander Spooner episodes are libertyweekly.net/27 and 28 too. 28 is the one about the Constitution of No Authority. But as Thijs alluded to, I also came out with a nullification episode, which is the 4th episode, libertyweekly.net/4. And my domestic violence paper, I had this episode that I did with Trey, who interviewed me about it, did a great job. It really, really helped to bring out the facts of the paper. But that was, the episode is called Non-State Solutions to Domestic Violence, libertyweekly.net/55. And I just talk about the perverse economic incentives of the state and having a monopoly on security, but also on justice, and how that negatively has affected the feminist movement and the anti-domestic violence movement. And I come at it from a feminist perspective because I'm trying to speak to the feminists. Of course, I'm not a feminist, but I was trying to explain it on their terms and show them, because historically, the anti-domestic violence movement has been feminist, but historically they have been trying to decide whether or not to embrace the state in trying to solve domestic violence. And the feminists don't like the state because they see it as enforcing the patriarchy or as being a male institution. And so in their minds, they're trying to, of course, they're progressives or left on the political spectrum, but they grapple with that issue of whether or not to embrace the state. And all I do is illustrate why they should not embrace the state and why they should instead turn to private security agencies, such as the one already currently operating in Detroit that specializes in domestic violence. They have a program. I'm forgetting what the program is called at the moment, but it's a volunteer program where they will, for no cost, help out people in need that are suffering from domestic abuse. So it's a great program. It's free market. It's 100% free, and it's way better than the cops. So
it was something with threat management.
Detroit threat management, and
yeah.
They're a private security firm that's been operating in Detroit for about 20 years now, and they've never been sued. They've never shot anyone, and no one has been hurt while under their protection. And they've been attacked by people. So this is the real deal. And it works in the real world. It really does. So one thing I posit in the paper is that, instead of always just sitting around talking to each other or complaining about, the police, or instead of trying to work within the system, why don't we just create competing agencies like the Detroit Threat Management Center until the cops are obsolete, until people don't want to call the cops anymore, but they instead call Detroit Threat Management or a similar provider. And you can see this especially in Detroit and Flint, Michigan, especially where the cops don't show up, where there's four cars patrolling and 40 calls that they have to answer. And, people call the police for shootings in Flint, Michigan, and the cops don't show up for 30 minutes, if at all. Or hours later. It's crazy. I was watching this documentary about it, and I want to do an episode about it too. But so these are real problems, essentially.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting because if you listen to or talk to people who don't know much about libertarianism, you always get like, yeah, but without the state, well, everyone, it would be a civil war, Mad Max situation, and so on. And, within the ANCAP community, basically, this case is somewhat filmed. really shows that how to put this. That basically that's not that's not at all how this works, because the state in general doesn't have, especially in the most vulnerable situations, it's completely incompetent basically, and the market doesn't just throw up their hands and says, "Oh, we don't know what to do." But if there's a problem, there will be an entrepreneur to solve it. That's how the market actually works, even with issues that are as traditionally the exclusive domain of the state as law enforcement and security really are. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's why I try to appeal, because so my mom is also a legal professional, and that's her response always is that, oh, well, without the state monopoly, we're just going to have civil war, Mad Max scenario, because no one's going to abide by the state's dictates without the coercive subpoena power, or the without the coercive authority of the state, no one would abide by the judgments. And that's why I really turned to the Magna Carta and to Anglo-Saxon common law, because if you can illustrate to people who respect that tradition and realize that the Western legal tradition is based off of Anglo-Saxon common law, maybe you can have an inroad with them, because in Anglo-Saxon England, which our entire, in America and Britain at least, our legal system is based off of the Anglo-Saxon system. If you can illustrate to them that it worked back then when they didn't have the coercive power that the state has now, then maybe they can make that connection. Maybe it will click with them, because they already have faith in the common law system, or at least some legal professionals do. I think old school, more conservative ones would. So I've had some success, but that's why I've been trying to focus on the Anglo-Saxon system, because it really is. It really does have a tradition of liberty, a very strong tradition of liberty. And I think that if people realize that, we'd be a lot better off.
And it's in Europe. It has come from a different direction, mostly from French and Roman law. But as you can see, for instance, I believe Rothbard talks about it. The European merchant law in medieval times. It was basically completely stateless. The courts didn't have enough official enforcement power, but through ostracism, they basically made a legal system that was much more efficient than anything else. And I definitely plan to cover that in more detail in the future.
Yeah, I had an episode planned on this, and maybe we could do it together if because I asked one of my co-hosts. I asked my old co-host to do it, but I think he's too busy. So, yeah, that'd be great. We could talk about, especially from your perspective, and I could compare it, in fact, to the Uniform Commercial Code that I alluded to earlier. Is that essentially what the UCC is in the United States? Each state has independently adopted the Uniform Commercial Code, but the drafter of the Uniform Commercial Code was a common law type of guy. So, and this is what we're learning in our class, is that he looked to what companies were already doing at the time and wanted to form the Uniform Commercial Code in order to solidify what they were already doing, instead of to arbitrarily dictate to them what they should do. And it's a lot the same thing. And so it'd be interesting to compare that to what is the current way that commercial transactions are governed in the EU? Is it all by like EU legislation?
No, it's most private law basically is national, so with statutes and so on. But like I mentioned in our interview, the EU has been taking more power on those issues. So some very basic agreements like purchase intangible property, like let's say you buy a DVD or something, then that's qualified. That's uniformly there's a uniform European regulation on that issue, and on the termination rights and so on. But mostly private law has kept in the national tradition, but it's important to note that because since Napoleon, basically, civil codes of Europe have looked a lot alike. So instead of the common law, from what I understand of common law tradition, it basically evolved out of judges and slowly over time. But in Europe, it's more. There was some customary law through the Middle Ages, but how it works today is a lot more legislation oriented. So since Napoleon, there has been a very long list of statutes that cover exactly all the terrains of the civil code, and you will find those traces throughout Europe. So that's basically how it works. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So it's a is there a concern with the legislation in trying to preserve, like, is the focus trying to preserve what people are doing anyways, or is the focus dictatorial in the sense that they want to change the way people are doing things?
Well, it does depend on the contracts. For instance, employment contracts and rental contracts are extremely regulated. In some places more than others. For instance, in France, it's absolutely crazy. You get like all sorts of business are incapable of growth because as soon as you hire more than like 50 employees, you get a mountain of regulations you have to do it. And in the Netherlands, we also have something. We also have a very regulated labor market and rental market, but some other sectors are a bit more free. But I would say that in Europe, civil law is generally more centralized and more focused on sort of social engineering than in the United States.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think we're moving in that direction too, the more dictatorial direction. I mean, Louisiana has more of the civil code system than the rest, because obviously Louisiana was a French colony at one time. But yeah, I think the United States is moving more in the legislative direction. I think you see that the most when it comes to the criminal law. But it's interesting because you guys don't have the adversarial system that we do, right?
Yeah, well, we have sort of a mixed system. So our judges get a lot more, especially in criminal law, they get a lot more authority to determine matters of fact. And also, we in the Netherlands we don't have any juries. In Belgium, I believe they have some juries, but nowhere in Europe do they have as much jury power as in the United States. So a lot of that fact finding power and is concentrated in the judges. So especially with criminal law and with administrative law, the judge has a very strong position on that. But with civil law, it's a bit more passive. The judge is a bit more passive. So he can't, for instance, if you claim like 5,000 euros, the judge can't give you more than that. So he very much has to defer to what the actual parties in the conflict have been pleading.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say that just had this thought that it's interesting what I have seen in the United States, at least in the last time that I've been in law school. I've seen a lot of questioning of the traditional roles that the court will play. Maybe in the broader conversation I had, so I'm on the Law Journal, and one of the associates wrote an article about racial bias in juries. And what I'm seeing is in the United States, there's a lot of frustration happening. There's a lot of people that are dealing with the state and realizing that the state, they're grappling with the inherent problems that we know the state has, and they don't know exactly how to solve it. But what I'm seeing and what this student was writing about was a questioning of the traditional role of the jury and saying, actually, no, we don't want to have a jury trial. Instead, because juries have implicit racial bias, was her argument, and it was from a left perspective. But at the same time, I think there's a point to be made there, is that, traditionally, as I get into with my episodes about jury trials, traditionally the trial by jury is seen as a palladium of liberty against the state. But when it comes down to it, just because the jury trial could give a barrier against the state doesn't mean that a jury trial is the best way to actually solve a dispute. Because essentially what you're doing is you're bringing in laymen that don't really know anything about the law, and all they're doing is solving a fact-finding problem. Well, you could streamline that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even though we have institutions that are supposed to protect us against state power, I don't think we should be wedded to those institutions just because they're traditional. I think we should be open-minded in determining, what ways are actually the best to solve disputes.
Yeah.
And I think that something like a jury trial is only exists because of state power. What do you think about that? That's kind of a headcanon, sorry.
Yeah, it's no. I've definitely I've read some interesting things. I'm not sure if you would have read the book, but it's kind of an obscure book, but it's very good also on matters of law. So it's by Morris and Linda Tannehill. It's called Market for Liberty, and it also discusses briefly the idea of jury trials. So it basically argues, I think, and that's definitely an episode subject I might be covering, but it basically argues that juries are a good thing for balancing out against the state, but in a stateless order, there probably wouldn't be any juries because you would want as much expertise as possible, and you could select your own arbitrators. So yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that's
I read about it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, I'm looking this book up now. It's on Mises, so I'll have to read it. But I agree. I agree entirely with that statement. And what I envision actually is either in a anarcho-capitalist society, I think you would have judges. You would have different dispute resolution organizations that would represent individual people. But I think that these DROs would hire based on a free market of arbitrators, of different judges that would travel from issue to issue and work. They would be free agents essentially. And I think that these arbiters would solve both the fact finding and the issue of law. If the jury did exist, I think you would have a class of professional juries or of professional jurors. And this was actually something that was proposed by this law student who was talking to professors. So I had this unique perspective of helping this law student edit her paper, but also hearing from her what she had talked about with professors in doing her research. And it seemed to me like the trend was that, juries don't really work. They're racially biased. And this lefty professor actually floated the idea of having professional jurors.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. Maybe we could cover the book together sometime.
Yeah. Sorry, don't want to get us too far down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah. Okay, so to move on to my question list, you could say something at the end, but
sure.
Especially for you, you're on time pressure, so we're gonna continue. So some of my other questions were: do you have any tips for libertarian content creators? So I mentioned technical and topical. So both technical, what kind of software, what kind of websites, what kind of programs to use, and topical. The question would be: what do you think? Where do you think the niche, the unique value is for content creators in the future?
Sure. So I guess first I'll just walk through the technical stuff. In terms of hardware, I was able to pick up this. Let's see if I can show with the camera here. I have this USB microphone. It's a ATR. I think I can send you a link in the show notes page, but this is the gold standard when it comes to microphones, at least in the United States. It's the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. And it's fantastic, man. I get great sounds with it. It was about $50 on Amazon. I splurged with my headphones, and actually I got good advice that I shouldn't use big headphones when I record for videos because it's off-putting, I've heard, but I love these headphones and my earbuds are broken. So I always break them. But I have a mixer here that I won't show just because it's too off to the side. So I have the mixer. It has a USB interface that will hook up to the computer, but also the microphone has a USB interface. So that's been working really good. I can't show you the microphone, obviously, but it is a really or the webcam, but it's the Logitech HD Pro C920, and that works really well. So to podcast, you can get started up with a computer and under $100, you can be up and running. In terms of like website design, I get my web hosting through 1&1, and they had it was a deal that was like $11 for a website and for hosting for the entire year. And you can't turn that down. So I picked that up. And I run WordPress. I run actually a pretty basic theme in WordPress from 2014, but it works with my color scheme really well. And I think the site I like the way the site looks itself. So I'm going to keep that. In terms of like audio editing, I use Audacity, which is free to download anywhere. It works really well. For video recording, I use Open Broadcaster software, which is free online at OBS. I don't remember the URL, but that's free online. There's YouTube tutorials. I use for all I design my own logo, but I'm not a graphic designer, so I might revamp that sometime in the future. But I use that using free software called Inkscape, where you can create your own logo designs, and there's YouTube tutorials for that too. For all my graphical overlays, I use canva.com, canva.com, and that allows me they have templates where you can just throw up a YouTube thumbnail and make one. It's really cool. So all this stuff is relatively cheap or free, and you can teach yourself how to use it just using YouTube, or, I'll help you out. If you're thinking to start a Liberty podcast, I'll definitely, tell you how I do it. So the other one was technical and topical. Did you have anything specifically that you meant by topical?
Yeah, I meant maybe you remember the topic I put on Facebook a while back. So what topics would you like to see? So maybe something like that. So do you have an idea about what podcast or blogging topics are not really being covered today and might be as far as connected to Liberty and might be a good idea for people who are looking to start but are not sure which topic they want to cover?
Sure. Well, I can tell you that there's a big market for libertarian podcasts. And I think the number one that is already filled is the talk show. I think that generally speaking, just current events are covered. Just two guys BSing back and forth is a common theme.
Yeah.
What you have, so we've got that. I think where there's room for improvement there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, and I think it depends on what you're good at. So do something that you're interested in, something that you would talk about anyways, I think. Something that you have some expertise in, and maybe you can expand it from there. For example, I think there's different themes and different approaches you can take. But for example, my buddy Kyle Anzalone he's our foreign policy guru, and I think he's doing something that no one else is doing, in the sense that he has a show that comes out 3 days a week where he covers foreign policy current events. So he has a quick turnaround. He can talk about anything. But even in the big names in the libertarian podcasting content provider community, I think Kyle's doing something no one else is doing, because, Scott Horton will have interviews with professionals, people who are doing stuff, but he doesn't cover the day-to-day, here's exactly what happened this week kind of stuff. So there's a niche there that Kyle has filled. I said earlier that the two guys in a living room BSing back and forth is covered. Well, it is, but the Don't Waste Your Hate guys who are at the Libertarian Union, they have that format. But what I think their niche is that they can speak to blue collar individuals or people that are a little more laymen, and they talk about issues that appeal to them more so. They're don't get me wrong, they're very intellectual and stuff, but I think that their podcast is more themed towards that market. They don't lack in content, and obviously they're very intelligent individuals, but I think that's where their market is. With Daniel and Robert, I think their market is popular culture, and it's not. Although they are academic, and this is like the Don't Waste Your Hate guys too. But although Daniel and Robert are academic, their market is people who would consume mass media. I think more so people who watch movies and people who are in the entertainment sphere. So I hope this is answering some questions. I guess the answer is that I don't know. I don't know exactly where the best place to go is. And I think the best way to find out is by jumping in and by, participating in the different ANCAP communities and seeing where, you can fit in. Or, everyone has their own thing. Like, Mance Raider does memes, and he talks about police abuse. That's kind of his thing. And the only way you can really find your niche is just by doing it.
Yeah, and for me to answer that question, I can put it in the description later when I edit the video, but I can show it briefly for the camera. So I bought this thing. This is one of the, I think it's an entry level mic, but it doesn't really matter. It's a local web store, box shop, and they sell like a kit. So I got these headphones and the microphone and the mount. How do you call it? Like a microphone mount, and it's all put together in a neat plastic case. So that's something I would recommend Atlantic to look into. And topical, yeah, it's basically the same. Start from your passion. Just start creating content. Start creating what I've concept I've learned in my entrepreneurship class is minimum viable product. So basically, just start putting stuff out there, even if it's not very refined, even if you don't have much fancy technical equipment. Just start creating something, and eventually you can build something up. And a tip for people who might be listening. I've recently joined Steemit, and I think it's a very interesting concept. I believe you are on Steemit as well.
Yeah, I am at Liberty Weekly,
Yeah.
And I neglect it, but I need to pay more attention to it.
Yeah. And the great thing, I think, the potential it has is that, well, also for monetization. Traditionally, there were like two ways of doing it. It's only like direct support, so Patreon and donations. And the other method is advertising. While those methods still work, with Steemit, the very interesting thing is that you can sort of receive money without other people sending you money. So there's this special this token, Steam token, if I understand it correctly, and then it's basically created, and then people who create content and people who comment and vote on it, they can earn money like that. So it's definitely, I think it's an interesting way for if people are looking to monetize content to take a look at that, and especially with recent YouTube and Facebook mess with all the demonetization and censorship and so on. Having a blockchain secured platform is might just be the way forward. Yeah. So
yeah, and if I could quickly, just bitshoot.com as well has been the video site that I've been pushing. And I think it's a viable alternative to YouTube. It just needs more users and more time to. It's been progressing. I think it needs to continue to progress, but it's getting to the point where it's actually a viable alternative now, and I think it'll keep getting better. But Steemit is great. I think what it does is it allocates. There's a certain amount of Steam that's created every day or every week, and it allocates based on the upvotes. It allocates Steam tokens to wherever users say they should go. So if users like a certain post, they'll put it, and then you get the new Steam. But it's great. So, yeah. What was your? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. It is the last question. Is there anything else you would like to mention or talk about?
Yeah. I don't think so. As well. I guess just on a final note, just saying that it's not hopeless. You can do something. You can be politically active. You can actually reach people. And I had a speech that I did in at Agora Symposium. That was a local Agorist convention here, and I make a parallel between the Revolutionary War period and now, and what we need to do. We need to look back to that period, and I kind of say, the history that you learn as an American in public school is wrong, in that the real American Revolution was actually carried out by the 2 or 3% of people that were just regular people and not the founding fathers. And so what we need to do is emulate them by having our own voices, because they had pamphlets that they would write and distribute all over the colonies. They had small liberty activism groups led by preachers that tied natural rights theories to religion and the revolution, and saying it's your duty to protect your natural rights, your duty from God. But essentially what I mean is that we need to emulate that. We need to have our own pamphlets. We need to have our own circles and voices of providers, people that are talking to each other, and the internet allows this. And we're living in such a time where you can be in a microphone in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, talking across the world to someone, from the Netherlands, and people can tune in and watch it anywhere. And so this is the Gutenberg printing press of the modern age. And I think we need to use it to advocate for liberty, because the technology is also being used to enslave us at the same time. So we need to be proactive, and we need to do it from a bottom-up, decentralized way. And I think that podcasting and YouTube videoing and just having conversations is the way to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I definitely think through the internet, and especially through sort of what we call Web 2.0, that you can create, anyone can create their own content. It's very important change in the future of liberty, I think. And as far as what you said about community, forming local communities, I have been reading something about that as well, and so something on Steemit as well. So I might be covering some of that theory as well in the future.
Yeah, awesome.
So yeah, what would you like to say?
Well, I was going to say it's really nice to know ANCAPs in real life. I know there's a lot of ANCAPs who have never met another libertarian anarcho-capitalist in real life, and it's quite the experience. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, definitely. So to end the show, I want to thank you, Patrick, for taking time out of your day to organize this interview. And I want to thank you, the listener, for listening to this conversation. I'm only starting out, so everyone that's willing to listen is very much appreciated. Would you like to find out how to support the show or how to give feedback? You can find me on steemit.com/@Thijs van der Linden. And if you don't know how to spell it, no problem, I will leave it in the description. And I have set up a website, gaiuslib.com. That is GAIUSlib.com. And I have set up a Facebook page at Gaius Libertatis. I want to thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.